Welcome to the Blacksmith Chronicles Podcast, the official podcast of Ryan Johnson Ministries. This podcast was created for the purpose of equipping others for the advancement of the kingdom of God. We hope that you enjoy this episode and encourage you to subscribe to the Blacksmith Chronicles today. For more information about Ryan Johnson Ministries, please visit www.ryanjohnson.us or email us directly at info@ryanjohnson.us. It is not time for another episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show. That's how I want to start every single podcast, but I have the privilege to actually be hosting one of my favorite podcasts, the Blacksmith Chronicles. I was talking to Ryan before we got into this episode, and I said I may hang up my podcasting microphone after this episode, because when I think of my podcasting bucket list, the pinnacle of success, taking over Ryan's show is definitely at the top of that list. And we are actually recording this episode in honor of a momentous occasion, a special accomplishment. Ryan has finally reached the episode 100 club. I reached the episode 100 club. That's like probably almost 10 years and 40 pounds ago for me. But I'm glad that he finally is joining the ranks of podcasters who have gotten into the triple digits. Ryan, it is an honor to take over your show, my friend. I'm excited to see what we talk about today.
I can officially say I've reached my destification.
That's right. That's right. See, and I appreciate you helping me to learn Southern phrases and terms. I'm 2 weeks out from my move to South Carolina. I don't really have my shorthand dictionary. What will I do when I go into stores? Will I be able to communicate with people? I really don't know.
You know, it's a process of growth. Eventually, over time, you will become a little more distinguished and dignified amongst the population here in the South. And your fame will go leaps and bounds because of it.
Well, I'm excited to see where God wants to take my fame. I hope it is for his glory. But, and I can say, as a guy who spent a couple months in Georgia, several summers back in the day, I would come home with an accent using different words. So I imagine it'll be very short before I sound different on my own podcast. I will lose all of my northerner tendencies. My Yankee tendencies might be more appropriate. But that's enough about me trying to become Southern. That'll be a journey that'll just happen naturally all on its own. I think the place I'd love for us to start, Ryan, is to hear why you even got into podcasting. I feel like a lot of us have varying reasons why we start down this path. We want to talk to people, we want to meet people, we want to network, whatever it might be. We think it's going to be fun, we think it's going to be easy, but it ends up being a lot of work because it is a labor of love to produce content of this sort. But for you, what was that original thought, that aha moment where you said, I need to start the Blacksmith Chronicles?
Believe it or not, it was more than just being bored with life. I know probably some people that listened to the early days, they were thinking, man, this guy's just bored. It's not really that. For me, I began to have this, I'll say, transition in my life where I found myself appreciating the conversations more than I did the platforms. And it doesn't mean that I don't sincerely appreciate my platform opportunities, because I love them. I love ministering. I love preaching. I love teaching. I love doing all those things. But it was the conversations that I was having with individuals that really captivated me a lot of times. It was the ability to ask the things that I was thinking, to walk ideas out. I say this a lot. We live in an age of communication, but we don't know how to have a conversation anymore. And I enjoy having the conversation, to ask the difficult questions, to really look at the way people view things or they understand things. And so for me, it was a natural draw to a podcast format and just listening to other people. I enjoy preaching. I enjoy listening to preaching, to listen to teaching, revivals, all that. I love all that. But I was finding myself captivated by what I was hearing through podcast. And when I say that, I don't necessarily simply mean Christian podcast. A lot of times I would listen to podcasts of sports related, or, a serious theme or a matter, or in some cases, what most would consider a secular. And it would cause my wheels to turn. And it would cause me to think about things that I just typically wouldn't think about. And I began to realize, hey, I want to have these conversations. I want to open it up a little bit more. So that initially started the idea of, I think I want to do a podcast where it's not just my voice, although there are definitely podcasts where it is my voice, but I want to have these real life conversations. I don't, even though we're kind of set up in an interview format, I don't look or don't strive to have an interview. My goal is to always have that conversation as if you and I were sitting in a room over a cup of coffee. That's what I want. That's what got me here.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that makes the guests I send to your show come back to me and say how much they enjoy the conversation. I've got two or three shows I can think of off the top of my head that every time I have somebody be a guest on that particular show, I'll almost always get feedback saying, "Wow, that was a great experience," or "It was different from some of the other podcasts I've had." Because a lot of times, and my show tends in this direction, or although because of our friendship and partnership on some content, I actually go more off the cuff and am less pre-formatted, pre-planned now on this side of things. But a lot of our content in the space we're in, we're talking to people about books, new products that they've released, and so oftentimes, you'll stick to a format. Hey, there's a press kit and questions and all of that. And I think people really appreciate that. You kind of get off into the weeds, maybe into places that other people will not dare to tread, I guess would be how I would describe it. I think one place I'd like to go next is just have you reiterate the why of the blacksmith in the Blacksmith Chronicles. I kind of assume some people who listen to your show are already familiar with that, but I also know that people, maybe they're encountering us for the first time in this episode 100. They don't maybe know the why of the Blacksmith Chronicles. They wonder, was Ryan a blacksmith in a previous life? Like they just have no context for that part of your journey.
And I have had that question asked before by some guests. They come on behind the scenes and they want to know, are you a blacksmith in real life? Is that why? And believe it or not, no, I'm not an actual blacksmith, but it's interesting because now it's become so much of my identity, which I embrace it. I love it. But many years ago, I began to have this pinging sound in my ear, and it wasn't like ringing, but it was a ping. It would just happen. And I honestly thought I was beginning to lose my hearing because when I was younger, I did do some ear damage to one of my ears from shooting a pistol consecutively without ear protection. And I thought, oh no, this is it. I'm losing my hearing because I'm hearing that pinging sound. And that's something I'd heard people talk about when they lost hearing. And it would come and go. Would just come and go in life. And one day I'm flipping through the TV and I see a documentary about a famous motorcycle builder who is going to Israel to learn this specific art of blacksmithing. And I thought, hey, that's kind of interesting. I believe I'll go, kind of check that out. And I went and I started watching it, and I was intrigued that this was only taught in Israel. This is the last known instructor of this one particular style of blacksmithing. And it had to do with the way that he hammered. But when he did, and it was on the television program, the ping instantly, I recognized it as the ping that I was hearing. And I had been hearing for some time. And I was like, whoa, that's it. That's that ping. And it sent me on a twofold journey. One, naturally, it sent me on the journey of learning about blacksmiths. I'll be honest, I'd not known much about blacksmith in the natural realm of things. We see them occasionally in some places. Most places, they're known as a farrier, people that do horseshoes, goes to horse farms and put horseshoes and stuff and everything. Blacksmith terminology is not something that's very common in our generation. It's common a little bit more now because History Channel has a television show that deals with that. But if you watch that, it's not necessarily in and of itself blacksmithing, because it is bladesmith, and they're making specifically about blades and stuff and everything. But nevertheless, I learned about all that. And then I really started diving into the Word of God about this topic of the blacksmith. And I was really captivated at scripture that details the blacksmith and the importance of the blacksmith, what it meant to Israel, what it meant to all of us, even in the kingdom, and how God views the blacksmith. And so I went on this journey of understanding the natural and the spiritual elements of it. It became something so passionate towards me that I actually developed this message about the need for spiritual blacksmiths in the land again. And before I wanted to do it, I was talking to a friend of mine, and I just made mention one day. I said, hey, man, it would be so awesome if I had an actual blacksmith up on the stage, that when I preach this message, he's able to walk this out so that when people are not only hearing the word, they're actually seeing the demonstration of it at the same time. And he just kind of chuckled and he goes, well, you know, my stepdad. I said, yeah, I've known him for years. He goes, well, that's what he does part time. I said, he does what? He says, he travels and trains people in the art of blacksmithing. I said, you got to be kidding me. I never knew that about him. And he goes, yeah, he has this travel kit and everything. So we set it up. We did it. It was phenomenal. We did it a second time, recorded it, made it into a DVD teaching thing. And it really became sort of a theme that, you know, we were talking about raising up spiritual blacksmiths. We had a conference, RJM. Our personal ministry holds a conference every year called Prophetic Cultivation. And one particular theme, we concentrated on the blacksmiths, brought the blacksmith in again, did all that, set all that up. And the more I got to thinking about it and the more I got to drawing towards the podcast side of things, I thought, this is what I want to do. I want to have a journey of conversations that are like a blacksmith. And what I mean by that is, you know, if we go and watch a blacksmith and they take a block of steel, we have no idea what that thing's going to be. But the blacksmith knows from the beginning. But he has to put it in the fire. He has to pound on it, put it in the fire, pound on it, put it in the fire. He has to take the shape and the form. When it's all said and done, the blacksmith makes this beautiful thing, but nobody knew what it was going to be in the moment. So that's what I said. That's what I want in these podcasts. I want to go in and just pound things out. And by the end of the podcast, we have something that is beautiful. It's something that is not always the same as everybody else, because all these guests that we have on the podcast, they do multiple podcast interviews. And I imagine they get asked a lot of the similar questions and they have a lot of the similar answers. And I didn't want that for a podcast show. I wanted something that was tangibly different. And sometimes that means it's a little uneasy. And we don't know, my guests sometimes don't know how to respond or how to answer some of the questions because, you know, the pounding out can be a little challenging at times. It's not my goal to be shock value or try to trip people up. I don't have that intention at all. I'm looking for something that is authentic and pure. And that's the challenge in it. But that's how we became, you know, the Blacksmith Chronicles. It's a journey of pounding out the difficult conversations so that we see something beautifully made.
Well, and I think style wise, that's one of the things I've appreciated. You've interviewed me before for your show, and I've been a part of kind of co-interviews with others, and obviously familiar with your content. Is you do pound it out. Will keep going after a question and trying to go a little bit deeper, and get more clarification. And that's pretty rare. You don't see that in a lot of podcasts where somebody will just kind of like a dog keep pursuing that bone just to get to that finish line where that gold is, if you will. I think the next thing I'd like to hear a little bit about is how the journey of doing 100 podcast episodes, how has that changed you? And you can go whatever direction you like with that. For example, for me, I can be pretty shy and introverted at times, and God has used me or has used podcasting to give me confidence and just open doors for me to speak with, you know, like just, you know, normal author across the street to super famous people. And God's just blown up my world and really used it to build a confidence and level in me that I didn't have 8 or 9 years ago. And so, you know, that's one way I can say, man, God really used this to stretch me, expanded my world in terms of my work and ministry opportunities. And so that's my story. But for you, 100 episodes in, how has God used podcasting maybe to shift you also, like personally, but also shift relationships, ministry opportunities? Even though it seems like we're just interviewing people to help promote a book or get a good message out, God actually is very intentionally using it to shape our world.
I think on the natural side of it, I always thought I was a pretty decent, I I guess I would say worker. I'm trying to think of a different word than that, but I really don't know how to describe it any other way. But the podcast world has caused me to be even more disciplined. My work ethics, I feel like, now this is my opinion. Of course, you know, if you ask other people, you might get something different. I feel like my work ethics has always been relatively good. You know, I generally put in 100% in every area of my life. but it's caused me to be a lot more disciplined than before. Technically, when we're recording this right now, technically this is my day off, but I'm here in the office recording this. And after I get done with this, I have another recording. So sometimes it has caused me to work things in a disciplined manner. Now, it doesn't mean that, because I know a lot of people think, well, you got to make sure you have your days off. I work other things around at different times, but sometimes you just have to be in the moment for that to be able to catch it, because you're working with other people's schedule as well. And I don't have a PA. I don't have someone that is doing all the production side. I don't have anybody doing all the graphic side. So I'm having to do all the editing. I'm having to do all the graphics. I'm having to do all the announcements, the uploading, all that stuff. And it's a tedious responsibility, but it is something that has caused me to come into the office earlier. It's caused me to stay in the office later at times. And so, ironically, I feel like it has uh, made me a better individual in how I function, working behind the scenes of ministry, because ministry is so much more than standing behind a pulpit. So I feel like that side of it. On the personal side, I'll say it has given me the thing that I crave the most, and that is authentic relationships with individuals. Everybody that comes on the podcast, I don't develop a relationship with them. Some of them are, we're opposite worlds, opposite time schedules, and things just, doesn't be what it is. But there are those relationships that click. And there's those moments that just happen. You and I are an example of that. Our ability to really cultivate a relationship would have never, well, I don't know if I'd say never, but it was assisted because of the podcast for our ability to meet one another and then grow with one another and enjoy this journey. And we've even worked out to be able to do things off podcasting. And we'll continue to do that in the future. And that's happened with a couple of my guests where there's just something that clicks. For me, I'm not looking for the big marketing name. I'm deeply, deeply looking for a relationship with every single one of my guests. And if I get that, I'm the top of the world. And if I don't get that, it's okay. I don't go in a deep, dark depression or anything like that. I understand that. But for what it's given me in the relationship realm is phenomenal. Some of the closest individuals that have become genuine friends that we message, we talk, we speak with one another is really, really fascinating to me. Some of my guests that I communicate with often, we've never met in person. There's some that are coming up soon that our paths are getting to cross, but we talk a lot. And it's because of that's been the game changer for me on a personal side of it.
Yeah, I think the friendship aspect of it is huge. That's been my experience through the years. Now, you and I got to meet in person when I was in Charlotte for a Sid Roth taping a number of months back, and I find eventually I do meet most of the friends I make through podcasting in person. We try to make a way, but I feel like God has used podcasting for me, and with the examples you gave, to make relationships at times when you can't be you like you said, there are people that you click with, but it's not always the people that are just right around you where you live. And thankfully, with technology, Zoom, Skype, all the things, the ability just to stay in touch or even to text people, it's super easy. But it takes that one-on-one conversation. There's a lot of relational equity that is built spending an hour over Zoom or Skype and just looking each other in the face and just having a conversation. The other side of it, and I don't think people always realize this. This is definitely how it is for me behind the scenes in publishing, but also with podcasting. I would imagine you've experienced that same thing. There's ministry opportunities that come up where you get to minister to and encourage the guests that are coming on, because we're all having conversations outside of the interviews that we're doing. And I find also those guests will sometimes in turn minister to us, where they'll be like, "Man, can I pray for you? I feel like God's given me something." Like it's I'm not always looking for those things, but some of the craziest words I've gotten and biggest encouragements have come from leaders I would have never in a million years asked to pray for me or expected they should pray for me, but they were prompted to do it. And so I feel like God can use that in a lot of ways to encourage us along the path. And as a lot of our friends who are leaders know, ministry can be a lonely place. And when you find people who get you and get your world and are your people, and you got to hold those people close because those are the people you want to do life and be on the journey with. Kind of a funny question I would ask: what have you learned are your filler words? Because that is the strangest thing. When you edit hundreds of hours of yourself talking, you learn all the quirky things you do and say when you're thinking or when you're nervous or whatever. So, for you, what have you discovered are your like top two or three filler words when your brain and your mouth are trying to catch up to each other?
I think just as I did right there, I'm notorious for saying uh, and the process of that is because a lot of times I find myself thinking. I taught myself years ago, and I haven't mastered it by no means, but it's something that I continue to do, is to slow down and actually listen. Listen to what people are saying, and then try to process what the answer is, not just react with something. Because I think a lot of times when people hear something, they're looking to react with an answer that they want to be heard. And that's one of those things. So, out of that, when I've slowed down, because I wanted to learn how to respond instead of how to react, it's caused me to go, uh, you know, and that's one of those things that I catch myself doing that a lot of times. I realize that I say in reality a lot. In reality, I'll say that. I'll say in reality or however. That's kind of a lot of my go-to words. I don't think about it in the moment, but you hear it again. I'm like, God, I say that a lot. But then there's just the Southern language itself. And that's where I know a lot of people are going, what did he say? Now, in my mind, I know what I said, but the language, the dialect of my Southernness comes out through and through. So there's probably a lot of fillers and gaps there that people are going, I just have no clue.
Yeah, for episodes 101 to 200, Ryan will include a link to download kind of a cheat sheet dictionary for the things he says. If you're a Yankee like me that you just don't know what he's talking about, it is fascinating because you'll find there are those episodes where for whatever reason your brain gets on a roll, and every time you talk, you say that same phrase like in every single sentence. But the thing is, like I find when I'm editing my track, and so it feels like I'm doing it a ton, but it's often spaced out over the course of the interview. So I feel like a lot of times people don't even notice. And in terms of producing content like this, whether it's audio for a podcast or video, you have to really find that balance between quality and making yourself sound as professional as you can, but also just having this massive time suck of editing into death and almost making it fake. Like we're in a place, especially with everybody being stuck at home last year and doing everything digitally, people are more used to just conversations and just kind of normal things. And I've gotten to a place where I've learned, sometimes when I'm talking or I'm thinking, I do say or ah, and it's conversationally. That's literally how I talk. So do I feel all shameful because, well, gosh, I'm just not good enough or I haven't arrived as a speaker? Or do I just feel like, sometimes when I'm nervous or excited, it comes out more, but that's okay. That's kind of I feel like it makes the conversation feel more real. So, obviously, as a fellow podcaster, I think about all the filler words because you'll have guests that use tons of filler words too. And you're like, wow, you've said that 18 times in this half hour. I guess I just want to say don't get down on yourself. If you have a lot of filler words, you'll get better over time as you get more comfortable. But literally, if that's just how you talk, don't beat yourself up. Just be you. Because when you can be you and in the moment, and like Ryan said, listen, it makes the conversation that much more general. And when it's a genuine conversation, people really listen and they really press into that. Versus if it feels all fake and produced like some audiobook, while the sound quality and the production value is phenomenal. I feel like people are almost pushing back against things that are too overproduced at this point. So let it be real. Don't take away that organic feel. Any other tips or tricks related to filler words, or should we move on?
I don't know that I have tips or tricks, but I do like, again, because you know me, I like the authenticity. I make fun of myself. I know how I sound. I'll never be able to deny to the fact that I'm Southern, but there is hope in that. And what I mean by that is one of the most popular Southern accents in the world is Matthew McConaughey. So I'm just waiting for the moment for people to say, "You sound just like Ryan Johnson." So there's hope in that. But no, it's one of those things. I would rather you be you than for you to give me your radio voice or your Hollywood version or whatever. I just don't have the stomach for the fake. I would, uneducated or mildly educated or overeducated. Big words, small words. Man, I butcher stuff all the time. I actually recorded a class for an online school that I'm part of, and I've done a whole teaching on propitiation. Do you realize how difficult that word is for me to say? And you realize how many times I had to say it and how many times I messed up and just owned that I messed up when I said it. I just said I'm going to have a difficult time with this word, and it is what it is. So just own it.
Well, and that's the thing. It's funny because we clean stuff up when we edit before we put content out. But even me, like I'm 800 and some or more episodes into my podcasting journey, and I recorded an episode yesterday where I had to go through my opening 3 times because I kept butchering the title. And then the second time, the author's like, "Actually, you have one of the words wrong in the subtitle." So I had to correct my notes and go through it. And thankfully, she was gracious. But that's just life. You're making content, you screw things up, and
Yeah.
hopefully it makes it feel a little bit endearing or whatever. I don't know. I think the place I would like to go next would be guest books that have made an impact in your life. Obviously, you're talking to other
Mm.
authors and leaders, and for the friends that don't get included in this episode, we're sorry. Ryan loves you equally as well, but I can think back on various people I've talked to through the years that just something they said in the interview, or even having the opportunity to get to talk to that person was a big deal. As you look back on 100 episodes, like were either experiences with the guest or getting a chance to talk to that guest or even just the message of their book, like what were some of the milestones or highlights for you, and maybe they're not even guest related, but the big things that stick out over the journey of 100 episodes?
Such a
Broad question.
well, it's an interesting aspect, because there is the books that naturally make an impact in your life because it's words that you can really chew on for a long period of time. There's something. I'm not against the Nooks and the Kindles and all that. I still enjoy writing in books. I love taking a highlighter and highlighting, and there's something about that fascinates me, to be able to sit there and stop and go, okay, what does this really mean? You know what I'm saying? And I think there's a couple of books. One it's I understand um, the foundation of it. I understand the premise of it. I understand a lot about the book, but I love how it challenges my thinking, and that is Redeeming Your Time with Pastor Troy Brewer. Just because uh, I get it, and at the same time, I go, wait a minute, that's a little bit. I got to wrap my mind around that and a little bit more than what I think. I'm one of these individuals that I like something that causes me to stop and have to think, okay, what exactly does this mean? But could it mean this and could it be that? And so that one really stretches me in a good way. I enjoy that a lot. Um, Anything revival theme. I mean, it's just one of the, I'd give anything to interview Leonard Ravenhill. My gosh. But I thoroughly enjoy anything revival because one of the books that was so influential in my life was Why Revival Tarries. So Pastor Todd Smith's got a couple of good books on revival that just really stirs you. I thoroughly enjoy that as well. Um, Ben Hughes has got a good book that's not necessarily purely revival, but it's when God breaks in. But you can see the structure and the DNA of revival in that book. It's not solely concentrated on revival in that sense. Um, those are just some examples that I enjoy personally, the revival side of it. But analytically, to be able to be challenged in my process of thought, anybody that writes in something that I would chalk up to an A.W. Tozer or a Leonard Ravenhill to a degree, in that sense, I like that process. I have not interviewed the author of the Bonhoeffer biography, but Eric Metaxas, but I would love to do that as well. Just because I'm a huge Bonhoeffer fan too. His life fascinates me. But one of the most prolific books in my life was The Cost of Discipleship by Bonhoeffer. So that's one of those things, but nevertheless, guest wise, I will admit this is a personal goal of mine in the conversation, to get my guests to have to think before they answer, to really have to stop and go, and I know it comes to that point where there's that moment where they stop and they go, wow, I got to think about this for a moment, or I've never been asked that before. If I can get to that goal, that's what I thrive for, because I feel like that's where I get the meat. That's happened with Mario Murillo, to be able to go, that's, him sit and go, and that's a question. Hold on just a second. Let me think how to respond to this. Because I just have a huge amount of respect and honor with Mario on that side of it. Recently, I did one with Pastor Todd Smith there in Georgia, and I was captivated by his interview, because there's one moment that he just stops and he goes, I've never been asked this before. You could just tell there was weight on how he wanted to respond with an answer. And it was for me, it was captivating as a host, but even more as someone that was listening to what they were saying. Ben and Jody Hughes is some of my favorite people to get on, because they have such a sincere hunger for the harvest, to see people come and be a part of the kingdom. Robert Hotchkin is someone who just absolutely challenges every aspect of the way that I think. He's a very, and I don't know if he'd view himself this way, but to me, Robert is a very methodological. He breaks things down, and there's a challenge in that I love. That I love how his mind works, and to have him on the show is just something that is just crazy awesome. I've enjoyed that a lot. Of course, Pastor Troy Brewer, just because I just want to be that guy's friend for the hunting and the fishing. The Christian side of it is amazing, but he's like the American version of the crocodile hunter. You do a podcast and he's got a bearskin rug in the background, and I'm just like, who does that? So there's those principles where it's really, really cool. But I've had so many things where, I've been blessed to have people. Chris Valentin has been on there. Chris, he had a really interesting book that had everything to do with Christianity, the kingdom, the advancement, but it was so focused on marketplace ministry. And the challenge behind that stuff. And I really, really liked that. I enjoyed my conversation with Chris, and that was really, really cool. But there's people that, other people probably never even heard of, that is just one of those things where you go, I wish that you could really tap into what a lot of these people are really putting out there, because there's so much. I think one of the most valuable insights was by, we both interviewed this young lady, Jessica Tate. I was captivated by her story of dealing with missionary PTSD, being a missionary and going through these war torn areas and stuff. And you're just like, man, no one talks about that stuff. That was fun. That was interesting. Sarah Bowen is always somebody that is, I enjoy my time with Sarah. She brings joy, natural joy to the conversation. But there was things that was monumental for us. I had John Veal, Waylon Henderson, and Chaston Strickland on a podcast. We discussed racism within the church and the nation, and that was one of the most, in my opinion, honest, open, and real conversations that we'd had. That gave us a couple of conversations thereafter, gave us a mini book as well. And those conversations continue to grow because of it. But there's so many that it's been so much fun. And it's challenged me. It's interesting to say I'm trying to challenge my guest, but at the same time, they're challenging me.
How do you deal with like heart motivation? And I guess I mean that in the context of, it's a constant struggle where we're promoting our content, our podcast, we're trying to get the word out. So there is a marketing aspect. So, going after bigger named guests with platforms that is helpful to grow the kind of the reach of what we're all doing. And and there is a certain kind of fanciness to be associated with high level leaders and such. And I think early on, I know there can be this temptation of just to go after like the biggest, most famous people to grow a show. And then if you're not genuinely interested in those people, you're just interested in their platform, or if you're going after topics that are just kind of completely out of the lane that God's given you to operate in, there just isn't a grace on any of that. And so how do you balance that, kind of your heart motive for the guests you want to go after? Because we do need to sometimes talk to big name guests because it does help us grow. But if our only motivation, I feel like if the only reason we want to talk to fancy people is to make ourselves look better, more fancy, that's kind of shallow. So, like, how have you learned to balance that?
I think, you gave me I believe, one of the best compliments about the way that I do a podcast. And I've never forgot it. You gave it to me probably a year, maybe a year and a half ago. You said, uh, I enjoy the way that you ask questions because I can tell that you genuinely want to know the answer. And honestly, that is my approach. So in saying that, when I have guests that I may not have anything in common with, it's my goal to pull out what is in them that I'm really wanting to know about. So I can have something on the polar opposite of the spectrum, but I know that there's something in there that is causing me to want to learn more about them. Why are they the way they are? Why do they believe the way that they believe? Why do they, and so it's one of those things where it's a deconstruction, it's a reverse deconstruction where I may have absolutely nothing in common with those individuals, but my pursuit of genuinely wanting to know causes me to go down these paths of, well, wait a minute. If you say that, does that not mean this? Or wait a minute, reiterate again what you're trying to say, because I want to understand what it is that you're saying. So for me, the balance comes in not losing why I do this to begin with. If I ever get off of the track of really wanting to know, then I think this thing would derail really, really quickly, because it just becomes an interview. It just becomes, a Hollywood rap party where we're asking the little, questions. What was it like filming the movie? And all the stuff that I know there's a lot of things that has to be asked, but I'm always looking for the things that are never asked. So that's what I want in that process. I interviewed Lucas Miles, who I absolutely have nothing in common with this guy, because this guy is like dominating the world. I mean, like, we're on total different spectrums of what he does versus what I do. I mean, his hand is involved in everything. Now, his message, I'm 100% in, I'm with that and stuff, but he's doing things that I can't even wrap my mind around because of the level of his influence that he's at. And there's a moment where I realize in the middle of the conversation, I'm like, man, I'm not even on the same page as this guy as far as what we're doing ministry wise. I mean, he's so far above and beyond where I'm at, but I want to keep pulling out of him because I feel like he can teach me something. I can learn something out of him. And so I'm trying to pull and trying to pull and trying to pull. And it's one of those things that I believe it's one of the more intriguing conversations I've ever had because of the difference in what we do ministry wise. So I just feel like to balance, I can't lose my purpose.
Yeah, I find one of the best ways to challenge myself is to bring on guests. And Lucas is a friend of mine as well, but as you well know, I've stepped far outside of the Christian publishing bubble that I work within, and have interviewed, like, big name personal development and government and business guests and all kinds of crazy stuff. And for me, that's been a different way that God has grown me, in the sense that I can't just mail it in, because I've done hundreds and hundreds of Christian book interviews. And but when you talk to people who don't speak our Christianese or our church language, you have to ask questions differently. Or, if you go into that with that same mindset of assuming they think of how they want to influence the world through their writing the same way that Christians tend to, it's not always the same. And that's been really fascinating. But I think, regardless of whether we're talking to people very much like us or even folks who are quite a bit different, I guess more than anything, you learn that the common experience is the human experience. We're all often pursuing a lot of the same things. It's just we're on some different paths. Or,
Yeah.
like in the case of Lucas, you guys are both in ministry, impacting the world. He's just using different channels than you. He is influencing through film, and he's got a podcast
Which
and
is so
other
amazing.
other crazy stuff, and that ties into his gifting. But I don't honestly see films in your future or my future. Yet God can bring us together, and He can use the medium of podcasting to help what the important work Lucas is doing through his new book and through his other stuff to connect into your tribe, and vice versa. And so God uses it to kind of give us a scenario where all ships continue to rise together as we partner up. I'm curious to hear how, 100 episodes in, do people relate to you differently or look at you differently, in the sense of, like, I feel like if people listen to your show, they feel like they know you. And so that can be kind of weird sometimes. And, like, I had the phenomenon, I went to Podcast Movement, it's the biggest kind of annual podcasting conference, I think about 5 years ago. And just sitting in on some of the keynote presentations, some of the people speaking, I literally had listened to several hundred hours of these people talking, because I just had listened to all of their episodes. And I felt like I was their friend, because I knew about their family and their journey and what they did in their business or their ministry or whatever it happened to be. And there's this false sense of relationship that's created because I feel like I know everything about that person. And so it does create sort of this one-sided relationship where you're constantly giving out content and people consume it. And if you talk about your life and what's going on, they do feel like they know you. So how has that impacted your ministry or relationships? Because people feel like they can be a lot more connected to you sometimes than they actually are in reality.
I think there probably hasn't been that much of a shift for me personally, just because social media had already done that. I would go to places and I would minister, and people would know things about me. And I'd be like, wait, how do you know that? And it would dawn on me later, there was a post, there was a share, there was a picture, there was something, and I'd be like, oh, yeah, that's how that is. So I was already prepared for that side of it. The one thing that I wasn't prepared for is I started going and ministering to places, and people would say, the way you preach is not the way you podcast. And I just never thought about it to begin with. And they said, "Oh, your podcast is so different than the way you preach." And it kind of dawned on me. It's like, it really is. For what people get with my podcast, whether they're listening or watching on YouTube, they're not getting that in the pulpit. The way that I preach is totally different than the way that I host the Blacksmith Chronicles. It's a 180. When I preach, I'm very, what's the word I'd look for? Lively, animated. I walk a lot, use my hands a lot. I can raise my voice occasionally, and as some would say, cut you and smile about it at the same time. And it's never my intent to be offensive, but I don't hold back from the truth. So I did realize about halfway, maybe three-fourths through the podcast, that I needed to start introducing some of my preaching stuff because I needed people to understand the balance of who I am. This slower paced, asking the questions and thinking things through. That is always who I am off the platform, in the sense of a conversation, a face to face. Whereas when I preach, there is a lot of emotion, there is a lot of animation in my movements and stuff and everything, but that's not how I am for the most part. When I'm off the stage, there's not that platform ministry is a sideshow. It's not that I'm intent at heart. It's just my preaching is definitely different than my hosting. So that's the one thing that really stood out. And so I started plugging in different times when I minister so that people wouldn't be as shocked, because you get the people that do listen to the podcast and I've had a couple of places I've been and, we listen to your podcast all the time. And you're like, awesome, and then you can see the shock on their face when they go, oh, wow, this is a little different than the podcast, So I did go through that for a little while.
Yeah, it is interesting too, because those are two different styles, types of communicating. I had the opportunity to preach a year and a half ago, and just at various times get up in front of people, and it's different to be on Zoom or Skype with the microphone in my home office space. That's a high comfort level. Dynamics change when you get up in front of
Yeah.
a crowd. You're still in front of a microphone, but it's different. Or what you're going after is just completely different. I feel like too, in the sense, like, obviously in the space we are in spiritually, the Holy Spirit directs us with our conversations, and we go places we hadn't planned to go. That happens when we're up on a stage preaching and talking somewhere. It just looks different, it feels different. There's just, both are important. It's just there's different kinds of weightiness on each of those situations, scenarios. Fascinating that people would expect you to communicate one way, uh, because that's what they're used to, but find out you are a little bit different when you're behind the pulpit. And I see that with a lot of speakers, though, where, like, Robert Henderson's a good friend of mine. You've interviewed Robert
Hmm.
before, I believe. When he gets into the pulpit and starts talking courts of heaven, something drops on him, and he just goes and comes alive, and it's powerful. Hanging out, having a sandwich or pizza in the green room or dinner, he's as normal as you and me, hanging out, all those great Texas words that he brings out. And it's just a grand old time. And it's not intense, it's not, whatever. But when he gets in the pulpit, man, the power of God hits him, and it's on. And so that's just, I don't know, I feel like that's kind of normal. But if you only encounter people doing interviews or hosting a show or whatever, and you've never seen them preach, you might not realize that. I often chalk it up to when the power of God hits that person and the anointing comes on them for that, especially when it's their life message or something that is just, it's their passion point. They just come alive in a way that they probably
Yeah.
don't in the average podcast interview. To get us in the home stretch to move towards wrapping it up, vision for episode 101 to 200. You're 100 episodes in, and, like, for me, I use, like, my milestones of hitting 500 or what to evaluate and go, okay, do I keep doing more of the same, or, like, where do I go next? So if you look ahead to the next 100 episodes, is there anything you want to maybe shift or change as you keep moving forward?
Um, I don't know necessarily that I want to change anything at this moment in time. I would like to get more, what's the word? Challenging guest. And what I mean by that is, a lot of the guests that I host, they're pastors or they're evangelists or they're prophets, apostles, whatever the case may be. And I love that. I'm not against it at all. I enjoy every moment of it. I want to continue doing that. But I did not long ago have an opportunity to interview a U.S. House of Representative. And I would like to continue to expound that. I would love to go after, pipe dream. And I think it's a lot of people's pipe dream is, man, if I could nail down Joe Rogan one day. And people automatically go, whoa, whoa, wait a minute, this guy's foul. I go, I know, but I would still like to have a conversation with him. And so I would like to be challenged in my conversations to where maybe it's not necessarily the hardcore pastor, the preacher, the teacher, the evangelist, whatever the case may be. Maybe they're borderline. And I would really like to know even more of where they're coming from. And I'm not saying I want to do anything with any Satanist or cult leaders or anything like that, but I would like to have a lot more intensive conversations with individuals who aren't always in the box of Christianity. I'm not afraid to have those conversations. I'm not afraid to be in the room with those individuals. I'm not afraid to be asked questions or think about things. I want to have those questions. I want to go into those places. So for me, it's not really about the change as much as it is the shift in some of the guests. I would love to go a little more, trying to think of a word to describe it. I don't know. The Christianese version is secular side. I would like to get some secular guests in that realm.
Mainstream.
Yeah, mainstream. Okay. Yeah. I would just love to do that. I would love to pick their brains apart.
Yeah.
Will it change anything? I don't know, but I'm willing to have the conversation for the opportunity of change.
Well, we'll have to take a sidebar and map that out because that's what I did for my show a couple of years ago. And I find those mainstream guests, people, a lot of who I find don't even necessarily know a Christian person or have a Christian in their circles, let alone somebody who's a pastor or who somebody is like a professional in like a Christian industry of any kind. They ask me some of the hardest questions, some of the best questions. Some of those folks that I've talked to in the past 3, 4 years have become good friends. We keep up with each other regularly, might text or reach out once or twice a month. And people who they're very famous in their own right. They have no need for a friend of my caliber or level in society. And yet there was a connection that was made in the conversation that, a relationship opened up. And so, man, I'm going to encourage you to do that. Cause I think what I like about that, and I feel like motivation is key here. When I talk to people that are outside of our space, I'm not necessarily looking to evangelize them or preach the gospel to them. If the opportunity presents itself, will I probably share outside of the interview? Most likely. I definitely want to challenge them and encourage them. Um, but I also want, I think people are often fascinated that as a Christian, well, you're not some fool or some idiot, that you can be thoughtful and deep and educated and all the things, because people have stereotypes of something that they don't understand. Often we think of people that we're not in relationship with more in the caricature or the stereotype version of who they actually are. And so it's just interesting to see what God does through a lot of
Mhm.
that. He opens up unexpected doors and unexpected relationships. And what I love about that too is it draws a different crowd. You know, the average person who would normally listen to mainstream podcasts, with some of those other types of guests, they're not looking for the average guest you or I have on our show. But if we talk to somebody who's part of their world that interests them, well, I go, well, gosh, maybe they'll see another episode or two that's kind of intriguing, and they'll get to meet Jesus for the first time. Like I feel like we
Yeah.
we don't know like the cascade effect of some of these things that we do. So I really love that new direction. We'll make that happen. Anything I haven't asked you, things that something you're just dying to fit in that's popped into the back of your mind related to your podcasting journey thus far.
I can't think of anything offhand. Of course, when we end this, it'll probably pop up into my head, but
All right, man. Well, we will wrap it up there. And I will say, as somebody who's been on the podcasting journey with you for almost 2 years now, really since I first started at Destiny Image, I have just thoroughly enjoyed partnering with you and working with you. I stick by what you said, or by what I said. You did. You also said it, referencing it. That you actually care. The questions you ask, like you genuinely want to know, and it's that genuine curiosity. And I feel like that comes through in a lot of my content too. people sense that, they feel that, and that's why interviews go so well, because you're literally curious and you want to know and you care, and it becomes more than just getting the word out for a book launch or that sort of a thing. So, Ryan, as far as people, because I will probably take this and put it up on my show as well, just to help spread the word far and wide for this your 100th episode. So, for the people listening to this on the Shaun Tabatt Show feed, where do people find out more about Ryan Johnson and the Blacksmith Chronicles?
The simplest way is ryanjohnson.us. Just my name, ryanjohnson.us. You can find all the links, Apple, Spotify, our YouTube channel. Subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. We've got an RJM online store. We have books available. I've written 3 books. 2 of them are available through Destiny. Check those out as well. We're on social media. I've had to restart my social media, believe it or not. Facebook took me down for violating community standards. So go figure how that ever happened. I'll never know, because they don't have to tell you. But I do want to say this for everybody else. This would have never been possible without Shaun's help. Shaun has been a major, major influential person behind the scenes for the Blacksmith Chronicles podcast, that people just have no idea how much help he has been. And so, Shaun, I sincerely appreciate it. We'd never been here without you. More than just a ministry partner or co-laborer, truly a friend. And I sincerely appreciate that so much.
Well, and the feeling is mutual. I love partnering with you. I'm excited. We're going to live closer together here in a few
Yes.
weeks. We can hang out more in person. And if you're listening to this, whether it's on my feed or Ryan's, you're thinking you want to start a podcast, don't feel bad about small, humble beginnings. You got to start somewhere. I can say podcasting has dramatically shifted my life, my career, all the ministry, all the things I got going on, like nothing else I've ever done. And so if you're passionate, you think this would be really cool, just go for it. You'll meet new people. God will create new opportunities. Content that's going up on podcast feeds and YouTube and TikTok right now, for better or worse. Some people don't like TikTok. I'm not really a fan at this point. The influence those channels are having on culture and shaping worldview and society right now is way bigger than mainstream media. So if God's putting some in your heart to go after speaking into those spaces, take the leap and do it, because this is, for lack of a better way to say it, where the battle is being fought in this generation. Ryan, again, thank you for the honor of hosting the Blacksmith Chronicles. I've been thinking about it. I probably won't hang up my microphone just yet, but you've convinced me that I should keep going for the long haul. I look forward to talking to you again when you hit episode 200. We'll do this once more.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to the Blacksmith Chronicles podcast. It is our prayer that this episode challenged you, encouraged you, and equipped you for the advancement of the kingdom of God. For more episodes or ways that you can partner with Ryan Johnson Ministries, please go to www.ryanjohnson.us or email us directly at info@ryanjohnson.us. Please join us again soon for another episode of the Blacksmith Chronicles.